tiene un reconocido lugar entre todas las tendencias. Lo mismo estuvo pasando con otros ámbitos del pensamiento filosófico. Cuando Aulis llega en los años 70, la filosofía del derecho está ocupada por escuelas. Está la escuela de Francia, con Michel Villé, que era tal vez el más universal de todos, pero también estaba la escuela de Perelman, otro de los maestros de Aulis Aarnio. Estaban, por supuesto, los italianos, que tenían varias escuelas, y todo eso termina con un proceso de síntesis que ocurre precisamente después de Helsinki. Nosotros nos incorporamos a una idea de la filosofía del derecho diferente, basada en el diálogo, en la conversación, en el intercambio de las ideas, y sobre todo en una valoración superlativa del saber de los juristas, que eso es lo nuevo que trajo, diría yo, la corriente que Aulis representó. Los libros de él habían impresionado mucho a la gente más joven de su tiempo. Los libros de él son, sobre todo, antes de The Rational as Reasonable, que fue el libro más conocido, una serie de libros que incluso no sé si se llegaron a traducir, creo que no, On Legal Reasoning del 77, el Legal Point of View en el 78, y sobre todo The Weisen der Rechtswissenschaft del 79, que fue el gran libro sobre el razonamiento jurídico. En ese momento hubo un previo a nuestro encuentro con Aulis en La Plata y en Helsinki, fue muy importante un manifiesto generacional que sigue siendo, digamos, el texto que dio comienzo a todo este proceso, que es un artículo escrito por Aulis Aarnio con Alexander Pechenik y con Robert Alexi en el año 81, que se publicó en 3 volúmenes de Rex Theory. Rex Theory, hay que mencionarlo, fue el gran órgano de la época. Allí la figura de Werner Kravitz, también recientemente fallecido, es obligada. A partir de entonces se gestó un movimiento de ideas que Aulis denomina, porque él lo lideró, el Bielefeld-Kreis, que era la reunión de Bielefeld, que comenzó en el 83 y siguió hasta los 90, que se fueron incorporando los filósofos españoles, franceses. Los grandes actores de este proceso fueron Aulis, Robert Summers, Neil McCormick y muchas otras figuras que estuvieron allí, prácticamente las más importantes de la época. Todo esto recibió a los argentinos, estuvimos muy presentes en todo esto, y este es el Aulis que hoy recibimos. Es una figura madura en su obra, en la evolución de su pensamiento. Él no solo ha escrito derecho, tiene casi 50 libros publicados, ha escrito sobre ficción, teatro, ensayo, está constantemente presente en el debate de las ideas finlandesas, escribe en los diarios. Es un hombre muy comprometido con la filosofía del derecho, el pensamiento jurídico, pero también con el ensayo y con el pensamiento acerca de la educación y de la política. Me parece que este Aulis Aarnio que recibimos hoy es una figura que es el de siempre y al mismo tiempo es un hombre que sigue siendo una semilla de convergencia, de encuentro, de diálogo. Ojalá que esta visita a Aulis nos permita renovar la relación a los argentinos con Finlandia. Ellos hacen reuniones nacionales, por ejemplo, hicieron hace poco la 3ª o 4ª reunión con los españoles, se reúnen con los italianos. Tenemos que renovar aquellas reuniones entre finlandeses y argentinos que comenzaron en el año 84, y porque hay toda una agenda común de una nueva filosofía del derecho, que probablemente no sea aquella gran filosofía de los años 70, 80 y hasta el 90, tiene una nueva agenda, tiene unas nuevas prioridades, tiene unas nuevas figuras, unas líneas de pensamiento. Aulis sigue siendo una referencia obligada, así que te agradecemos mucho. Finlandia y Argentina son 2 países muy próximos. Tenemos el mejor tango ambos países del mundo. Las orquestas de tango finlandesas son estupendas y las costumbres y los gustos de los finlandeses son muy importantes, son muy parecidos. Somos 2 países terminales en muchos sentidos, sobre todo en el sentido que están al final del mundo. Cuando uno va al norte, lo último que toca es Finlandia. Cuando uno viene al sur, lo último que toca es la Argentina. Y aquí estamos, te recibimos, le agradecemos a todos los que han venido. No sé si vamos a tener tiempo de preguntas, pero estas son todas bienvenidos. Y lo que estamos queriendo es inaugurar una manera de dialogar que enlaza tradiciones, que se proyecta hacia el futuro, que vincula generaciones y que establece una relación de respeto con todas las tradiciones del pensamiento. Welcome, Aulis. you're very welcome. We really miss you during all these years. You're welcome to Argentina. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Do you hear me? Do you hear me at all?
Perfect.
You hear?
Yes, we hear
Okay.
you very well.
Okay. First of all, some personal remarks. I have dedicated this lecture to my close friend and collaborator, Alexander Bekchenik, because that theme I am dealing today is our common topic. We worked years after years with these problems of morality and law and morality and such. The other remark is that when speaking about Carlos Alchourrón and Aulis Bulygin, I would like to say, or I have the honor to say, that we were family friends, like with Enrique too. So I remember them, of course, very well, and Eugenio especially visited, invited by Georg Henrik von Wright many times, and I already met Eugenio very early in 70s. I was a young doctor, and Georg Henrik von Wright ordered me to be assistant and help Eugenio. So we met. It's 60 years ago, nearly. And now to the topic. As far as legal reasoning and decision-making is concerned, there are three cornerstones, as you all know: ontology, epistemology, and methodology. Very often methodology, especially by lawyers, has been raised to the primary status in the theory of legal reasoning. The other two ones have remained on the side track. In this presentation, I don't deal with epistemology or methodology at all. Instead, my focus will be in ontological questions and problems related to them. More precisely, what is the ontological status of moral judgments? Accepting this starting point, we necessarily meet also foundation of legal reason. It is for a lawyer the foundation of foundations, so to speak. Ludwig Wittgenstein spoke about certainty and understood in his way the ontological foundation means exactly the same as a certain basis of thinking, and finally that of human life. To start, I refer to some ideas of Charles Taylor, who makes a distinction between weak and strong evaluations and defines them through the concept of wanting. I would like to describe a bit this concept. If a person holds it as better to swim in warm rather than cold water, so we are dealing with a weak evaluation. The grounds for the choice are purely in wanting, very practical one. A strong evaluation, on the other hand, is based on values. The choice is made depending on how good or bad the evaluated thing is. In other words, strong evaluations are beliefs and attitudes concerning the value of things. Along with beliefs, we may also speak about attitudes, namely because the strong evaluation is expressed in the ways man feels, wants, or knows. Based on these matters, man makes value distinctions concerning his world, whether they be between good and bad, right and wrong, and just and unjust. Taylor himself suggests that one constant would be the respect for other persons. This kind of valuation is not dependent on culture or historical circumstances. Taylor admits that there have been and will be situations where this principle is not followed and is therefore not valid, but other persons should nevertheless be respected in all cultures. In this sense, the principle is universal, being a valuable way of living a humane life. In any case, Charles Taylor has provided a clear formulation of the foundation of human life. But it is also problematic. What is universality? What is objectivity? And which are roles? Their roles in, let's say, conversation on morals and law. In the following, the focus of my presentation is only in strong valuations, and I try to make more precise what it may be, how it functions, and how it doesn't function. It is fairly to say already now that I am not an objectivist, but my solution is on quite another line. We see later on if it is interesting or not. Let us start, however, with a realist view on morals. Inside of the realist ontological movements, there are several varieties of them. One of the most representative alternative is introduced by Axel Hägerström, Uppsala University, Sweden, the founder of the so-called Scandinavian realism. Hägerström was not only one. The principles of realism was accepted also, for instance, by Alf Ross, but Hägerström explains his fundamental commitments in a more sophisticated way. As his starting point, Hägerström notes that all knowledge is knowledge about reality. It seems quite loose notion, but it is only a starting point. Knowledge is like a mirror picture received from reality. According to Hägerström, only one reality exists, and it includes objects located in time and space, which in their turn are objective. What cannot be placed in time and space doesn't exist. The expression, the world outside time and space, is self-contradictory. Those entities which really do exist define which statements are meaningful and an object of scientific research. Only statements that describe the existing entities belong to the language of science. That is why all kinds of metaphysics is impossible. According to Hägerström, reality comprehensively covers the states of affairs that can be subject matter of a meaningful sentences. From the ontological point of view, the idea could be called nominalism. Only real entities do exist, while general concepts, redness, for instance, or mathematical entities do not. ontological realism is a counterpoint to nominalism. For a nominalist, the mathematical entities as well as the general concepts are real, and they may be parts of consistent arguments. To be exact, this is not all what Egerström had to say. For him, three kinds of entities belong to the reality. First, physical objects, including human beings and events. They belong to reality not only as the contents of thoughts, but also directly. The second group consists of recollections, emotional sensations, and other mental states and processes. They are parts of reality only in an indirect way, that is, as qualities of entities that belong to reality directly. The third group consists of, among others, the contents of dreams and imaginations. They only belong to reality as the contents of thoughts, and thus in an indirect way, like the entities of the second group. Entities that cannot be classified in any of these three groups are not real in Egerströmian sense. He called these entities metaphysical and excluded them from the realm of science because one cannot know anything about metaphysical reality. Religious entities, as well as creatures of fairy tales, belong to that metaphysical reality. They can be poetry about these things, but no verifiable propositions. The Egerströmian ontology is an example of well-formulated and rigid, but also of problematic and vulnerable approach. The difficulties are especially significant as far as the existence of law, justice, and legal institutions are concerned. Universality of value statement is some kind of opposite view to that Egerströmian thinking. Let us now look at this tempting but vulnerable alternative, also vulnerable in other words, universalism. It seemed to me that people in all societies, at all times and in all situations, would be ready to accept the prohibition of killing an innocent man. Still, the history demonstrates something else. Millions and millions of people have been authors of the blind hate and violence, even in case that the killers bow in bright eyes in the name of morality. If one defends this kind of cruel morality, he also has to accept that the general principle, an innocent man shall not be killed, contains objective elements. What does it mean? My proposal is that the argument refers to the empirically large acceptance of the sentence. The other argument may be, and I don't deal with it, that the highest moral principles are independent from the subject. The counter-argument to this kind of objectivity is well known in the theory of rational reasoning. General principles are open of substance and invites one to interpret the principle. Principle as such is not a source of reasoning. In this regard, Alexander Bektenik used a felicitous proposal. He says that principles in a general form, for example, the aforementioned principle, an innocent man shall not be killed, are only prima facie principles, or Americans say prima facie, but I use that Latin prima facie. They do not give a final answer, not to speak the only right one. They are only prima facie. The real content of a moral principle can be identified by rational argumentation only for, as Bekjani says, all things considered. We must have argumentation in order to support that kind of general principle. In other words, moral principles are only starting points for further rational argumentation, expressions that challenge one to provide more reasons to support the interpretation at issue. Here is the bridge from the morality to rational reasoning. I will return to that later on. Summarizing the story, the general principles are not binding fundamentals, to say nothing about their being final arguments. They are not binding, not final, even though they have swept people along throughout the ages. When applied to a practical case, we meet other challenges not dealt with yet. What is essential of general principles, such as the aforementioned prohibition, are exceptions. That is one of the key words in Bekjanian theory. Here I refer, however, to the thoughts of Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz about an internal measure. Matters either have a locked or open internal measure. A circle is internally closed, a line, on the other hand, is open. Such concepts as happiness and kindness are similarly open by their internal measure. We can never say that we are completely happy, since there is always something that could make our happiness even greater. The difficulties can be avoided by means of a notion formulated by Alexander Bekjani again. That notion is already mentioned prima facie principle. They are open and a challenge for interpretation, and the crucial property being in their application retain their force only with help of exceptions. We have thousands of examples of that. How else could Hutus and Tutsis have butchered each other, or the people of Balkan to lift a blade to the other's throat? It is always so that general principle needs interpretation, and interpretation leads to only exceptions and used exceptions, and thus in that totality it is so that it makes people free to use violence towards others. Man's ability to handle piercing ethical problems calmly, also in case of violence, is built on general principles, but not only on them, but also reference to the exceptions made of these principles. People are masters to find out exceptions, which makes it possible or even easy to do all kind of tyrannic deeds. General moral principles are then used creatively, so to speak, in individual situations. the general principle is fitted into a whole consisted by time, place, and circumstances. These make it possible to say that in this exceptional case, the victims are not innocent, why they can be eliminated. Understood in this way, each application or general principle is bound to its context. The prima facie or prima facie command gets now the form, an innocent man shall not be killed unless. In practical context, the principle becomes conditional and can be applied more or less in different situations, and as is case with principles in general. In this view, an innocent man shall not be killed is a genuine principle. When it is used to decide moral problems, it needs to be fulfilled by two other notions, that is, prima facie, prima facie, and all things considered. The first one is the starting point, and all things considered is the result of a rational discourse. This combination reveals not only the difference of the applications, but also the reason why every moral reasoning has to be provided by further reasons. An individual application of the principle, an innocent man shall not be killed, can only be evaluated through its arguments. And that concerns all general principles. I want to refer here to an example given by Bernard Williams. The story itself is, I think, used in tens of times also by me, but originally it was Williams' idea. He tells about robber chief Pedro, who goes to a little village in the Andes. He rounds up the men of the village next to the church in order to shoot them. At that moment, Justus Caritas appears to be sent to the scene, being most likely a missionary when considering his name, but in any case, a moral man. Pedro asks Justus to make a choice. If he shoots one of the men, anyone of others will be let to go. If this doesn't happen, everyone be killed. There were 20 men, and if one is shooted, then all others are free, but if not, the 20 men are killed. Justus Caritas is strongly committed to the principle an innocent man shall not be killed. If he follows his guiding principle, which obviously is a foundation for his doctrine, 20 innocent men will be killed. If Justus is ready to compromise his doctrine and shoot one person against his will, he will save 19 others. Williams' example appeals to the reader and in this case to us in many ways. And in terms of the theme under discussion today, it holds one especially important lesson. A moral dilemma always comes into being when there is a lack of moral choices. The general principle referred to above does not give an answer because it lets open too many alternatives, some of them bad ones, and some even at most cruel. I shall leave Justus pondering the question and move on, but keeping in mind that every strong evaluation comes into the light when there is a lack or scarcity of moral choices. So if everybody can get everything, there is no moral problems at all. For moral problems are when there is no other possibilities. It seems to me that people in all societies at all times and in all situations would be ready to accept the prohibition of killing an innocent man. That is my starting point, as I already mentioned. Still, the history demonstrates something else, as I said. If one defends this kind of cruel morality, he also has to accept that the general principle, an innocent man shall not be killed, contains objective elements. What does this mean? My proposal is that the argument refers to empirically large acceptance of the same. In this view, an innocent man shall not be killed is a genuine principle. When it is used to decide moral problems, it needs to be fulfilled by two other notions, that is, prima facie and all things considered, starting point and the procedure. This combination reveals not only the difference between the applications, but also the reason why every moral reasoning has to be provided by further reasons. An individual application of the principle, an innocent man shall not be killed, can only be evaluated through its arguments. Therefore, the theory based on one and only one interpretation of general principle has to be replaced with procedural theory of morality, the theory which is so much developed by Robert Alexi. According to this doctrine, judgment on morals and values is a procedural one. Thus also the tool of the Bechdelian doctrine is the discursive reasoning, not the intuition, as is the case, for instance, according to the natural law. I think that this step from Scandinavian realism to that kind of rational discourse model is the decisive thinking about Alexis, Bechdelics, and my theory. Because here are just the bridge I mentioned between, for instance, realism and procedural theory of law. The theory of rational discourse eliminates the extreme opinions from the moral reason. The idea of discourse is to convince the other part, not to manipulate or persuade him or her. However, there is still open a crucial question. Is there any final and fundamental argument on the basis of which it is unnecessary to continue the reasoning, or should one continue the reasoning endlessly? When are we satisfied with our reasoning? If the reasoning should be continued endlessly, we are absolutely finished up to an extreme relativism, which in any case was very alien to Bechdelic and also to me. All what has been said before can be summarized step by step as follows. First, general moral and legal principles are prima facie reasons. That is starting point. Second, having this property, the principles are interpretatively open and need thus to be interpreted. This is also the case with the Constitution, because full, at least in Finland and Scandinavian countries, full of open and vague expressions. They must be interpreted. Third, intuition is not either a method nor the source for interpretation due to the lacking possibility of control the reasoning, because nobody can control the other one's intuition, then it is worthless in the rational discourse. Fourth, in the interpretation of general principles ought to follow the rules and principles of rational discourse. That is self-evident after what I said. Fifth, the interpretation is well-founded if it proceeds harmony. In other words, if seen from the totality, the arguments form a coherent totality. Now we have come to the answer what I to the question I put earlier. At which moment one is satisfied with the argumentation? At which moment it can be stopped to argue anymore? And that answer to this question is coherence. And sixth, the procedure toward a coherent moral statement, Peck-Jenny calls deep justification, different from such procedures which are based on intuition. What then does it mean in the end that the law and moral institute exist as an institution? In this regard, I refer to my countryman Erik Lagerspets, excellent philosopher, whose main book, Mirror of Facts, is, I think, very appreciated in Europe. And Lagerspets can be called conventionalist. But the ontology, in conventionalist ontology, or the theory of it seems to provide us with a more acceptable solution than any those described above. Lagerspets' focus is on three kinds of rule-based systems: language, money, and law. The last of those systems is, of course, most important for this study. Let us start, however, with some general problems. What is essential for the intersubjective meaning, or to be exact, what makes shared intersubjective meanings possible? To my mind, it is the deep structure of morals, what all the individuals belonging to a certain community believe to be the right one. When I said earlier that it seems to be so that in moral question, empirically, a great majority of people all over the world are accepting very nice general moral principles. And now, how this is possible, that kind of question is answered by Erik Lagerspets. The institutions and institutional facts exist for those individuals mentioned above because their institutions are based on shared mutual beliefs. And further, because those people believing in the institutions also act in accordance with the beliefs. Thus, the key of the matter is about a shared consciousness. When we speak about acceptance of general principle all over the world, it is based about shared consciousness. For this consciousness is not enough that individual people happen to believe in a certain thing in a similar way. Let us take an example formulated by Erik Lagerspets. In the example, the person A living in the community C has a belief and or attitude X concerning the societal fact Y. The same beliefs hold true of individual B. In the example, there are two persons A and B having these kind of beliefs. Then the belief X is shared and mutual in a given community if and only if every member of community C believes X. Every member of community C believes that every other member of C believes X, etc. They are shared, they are mutual in this very sense. The belief of B is connected to the actions of the community members as follows. An entity, let us say E, is a conventional fact if and only if there is a mutual belief X, then that belief provides the reason for relevant agents to realize E. So there is not enough only to have mutual reflective beliefs, but also acts caused by these mutual beliefs. All this is applicable to law too, as Lagerspets points out in his presentations. And an institution, in the institution case, one has to make very complicated structures of mutual beliefs, but it doesn't matter. Therefore, that the idea, the key, is just what I tried to describe to you. The shared mutual beliefs are always reflexive and in some sense circular. This doesn't, however, cause any harm in our communication. We have to accept that the analysis of social reality is necessarily reflexive due to the fact that the social reality is built up on a reflexive network of beliefs and attitudes. One question is still open. As we noticed, the shared mutual beliefs are, at least partial, grounds for social activity. What forces people behave in accordance with shared beliefs? The conventionalist ontology doesn't mean that people in certain community have actually made a contract, like Rousseau's case, with which they should behave in the future. Such agreements are certainly not historical facts, and for other reasons, they are not necessary either. Shared mutual beliefs and social conventions result from continuous processes, as the spoken language is a result of a development that is as old as the human language in general. Language is not a matter of agreement. Lagerspets points out that we can agree with the meaning of a single word, but not all meanings are based on agreement. All this means that people grow up to know the shared beliefs without being necessarily aware of this learning procedure. Sometimes an individual person has an incorrect image of the content of a shared belief, and he must learn things through these errors. However, the whole society can never have an incorrect image concerning its own conventional basis. In this very sense, a community as a whole cannot make mistakes as far as the shared beliefs are concerned. In order to finish my modest presentation, I would like to repeat that this kind of thinking concerning law and morality is deeply connected to the theory of rational discourse, which is very well known by Perelman, Alexi, and others, and where also Bektenik's theory must be located partially by too, although I don't want to mention myself in this context. And my eyes were opened several years ago when I understood that shared mutual beliefs are the firm basis for agreement, and it is in the same time those shared beliefs are the ontological basis of law. There are no, let's say, deeper basis of that. We are prisoners of mutual beliefs which we share with each other, and that is the basis how we also behave, and what makes extremely important to develop all kind of discursive methods, all kind of rational reasoning, because without rational reasoning we cannot understand and we cannot play with general principles in such a way that it fulfills the needs of human beings. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Aulis. We can open the floor for some questions or observations. We have some time for questions and discussions. I will open the floor for requests. Juan Pablo Alonso, unmute, please, because you are the host. And we are going to share the operation of...
¿A quién le abro la pregunta?
Well, let's expect the questions. You can all ask questions or observations through the chat, I think.
Horacio Spector. Perfecto.
Horacio Spector.
Yes. Hello. Thank you, Juan Pablo. Thank you, Enrique. It's a great pleasure, Aulis, to meet you again after so many years. I enjoyed very much your presentation and the paper that you distributed for this occasion. I have first a very short comment. I think that there is a philosopher, I'd like to mention this, there is a philosopher, a political philosopher in the US who passed away 2 or 3 years ago. It's Gerald Gauss, who has been writing extensively on the topics and themes that are very close to yours. So I think that you might find a very fruitful field for cooperation with that kind of literature. Gauss, in fact, has been studying how social morality can emerge and be maintained in different societies. And this leads me to my first question, which is, it's a problem that Gauss also addresses, but many others are concerned about this as well. I mean, to summarize your very complex account of morality and law, basically, I think that you said that there is a social fact about morality that is constituted by deliberation that reaches wide acceptance of moral judgments, and these moral judgments have a prima facie character, and those judgments somehow are included within legal practice and within the law itself. So the idea of shared beliefs or wide acceptance or universal acceptance raises the following question, because our societies, many of our societies are multicultural ones, and people maintain and defend very different comprehensive philosophical and religious doctrines. And so it's pretty difficult to find a set of widely accepted moral judgments. So the question is whether it's not necessary to talk about the different dimension of morality that is possible only when people.
Now I don't listen here.
You can repeat, Horacio, the last words. We miss your last sentences.
My last sentence is that, I mean, the question is whether we don't need, do we not need to go to appeal to a different dimension of morality, which is not moral judgments in the classical sense, but rather a minimal subset of moral judgments that can be asserted and accepted by people who maintain different and possibly incoherent moral conceptions. So we have people from different religions, different philosophies in our societies that defend actually incoherent moral conceptions, but somehow they must agree on some minimal set of moral beliefs. So the question is whether we don't need to revise that approach by introducing a special layer of moral judgments that can be defended by people who, on the other hand, defend incoherent moral conceptions. That's the first question. And my second question concerns the idea of moral discourse and your procedural approach to moral discourse. You say, I mean, morality is understood in terms of moral judgments, widely accepted moral judgments. My question is, I mean, those moral judgments are analyzed as judgments about what? Because if they are, I mean, if moral judgments that are widely accepted are judgments about moral facts, then it's no longer a conventionalist or social approach to morality, but rather a realist or old natural law approach still. So you might have to say, and that's a question, you might have to adopt an error theory and say, well, when people widely agree on moral judgments, they are not talking about moral facts, but they believe that they are talking about moral facts. So there is a widespread fictionalist or error-based approach in the way in which Mackey, for instance, talks about inventing right and wrong. So the question is whether you would defend an error theory as a supplement to your approach, to your sociological approach to morality.
Okay. How to start? If you mentioned, or if your idea was to say that in the first question, and what if people have different opinions of morality, and on the other hand, there is minimum content of so-called natural law, and why do we need any rational discourse? Was it that, roughly speaking, the question, your first question? Because I couldn't identify clearly what is the core of the question.
You're on mute. Unmute, please, Horacio.
Ay, pará. Ya. A ver, ay, de vuelta. A ver, listo.
Okay, thank you. I was trying to unmute myself. Basically, the question is, don't you need something like Rawls's political liberalism? The idea that we have, on the one hand, morality, and on the other hand, we have a realm, special realm of moral public discourse, a political culture, a political discourse, in which people can agree on some normative judgments, despite the fact that those same people defend incoherent moral conceptions. So the idea of coherence is not possible because we have Muslims, Christians, liberals, atheists, people who hold incoherent, different competitive moral conceptions, but still, because they live together in one single democratic society, they must engage themselves in some kind of normative conversation that finally agree on some normative judgments. So it's a two-level approach to normative judgments in the law. On the one hand, we have moral judgments, and people have different moral judgments, incoherent ones. And second, we have what Rawls calls political liberalism. The idea that there is a different realm of public conversation in which people, for instance, can agree about the fact that it's useful for our society not to punish women who commit abortion, despite the fact that they hold incoherent and competitive moral theories.
Yes, in Ross' case, I would like to say that his morality or his opinion on morality is immanent. All what he says about the theory of legal doctrines, for instance. So Ross, if we are speaking about his opinion and compare it to the others, his opinion is built in for instance, in his doctrine of sources of law. So I have just a paper. I am writing a paper, impossibility of legal realism, and in that I try to show that we need more sophisticated moral theory as the basis of all legal reasoning, and if we speak about Ross, so he goes too far in his realism because he cannot take a stand independent of moral statements. He behaves like a realist without any moral convictions, but is still a true boy of moral theory.
Enrique, no sé si hay alguna pregunta más.
Some more questions?
Ahí Lucas Amato, ahí te habilito, Lucas. Listo.
Thank you, Professor Aarnio. I would like to ask you a question about realism, more in the American sense, maybe, because after the anti-formalists and the realist critiques in the last century, there were theories of legal argumentation, of moral philosophy, that tried to give a systematic rationality and coherence to moral judgments in law. But to specify legal reasoning within the wider field of practical reason and not to collapse legal reasoning in a discourse of general morality. Some authors like you, I think, like Perelman, McCormick, seem to recover nowadays some concepts and methodologies that have been disregarded for many decades, like the ideas of subsumption, deductive inference, syllogism, rule. Do you see this as a kind of new legal formalism within the theories of practical reason and argumentation? Would you conceive your own work in these terms as a kind of new legal formalism within the field of practical reasoning and the theory of argumentation? Thanks.
Okay. I think that there is a very important point. The older I have become, the more I am interested in the basis of all kind of that, let's say, positivistic or this kind of structure of legal reasoning that we can count, for instance, sources of doctrine of sources of law, how to use the sources of law, what is rationality in large sense or strict sense in legal issues, etc. All that kind of methodological side of legal reasoning is I think nowadays not so important for me, because I haven't anything else to say about this. The rules of rational discourse, they are already formulated. That kind of Weinberger and McCormick's presentation about the institutions, they have already written, but very seldom people are thinking of the real basis of legal reasoning or moral reasoning in the name of ontology. We cannot do anything without ontological commitments, because if I say that I am interpreting that text of law, what is the target? What is the substance? And the substance escapes all the time, starting from the structural features until we come to the end. And for me, I must confess that I am much more interested now than before what I am doing as a lawyer when I say to analyze or when I say to write doctrinal essay book on doctrinal study of law. What I am as a lawyer when doing my job, and it is a human question, and that kind of human questions are more and more important to me, because they also are important for the younger generation. I am very happy to have some young people or had some people from Latin American countries where I could be a tutor for them, because I saw that they are serving their countries in order to change the human side of it, not only in order to learn how to argue and how to do it in a rational way, but but also in order to influence to the attitudes and evaluations of people making the future better. So maybe it is a problem of age, but I think that it is not only that, but the world is now such that that we need together all kind of tools, also ontological tools, in order to make this this our all better place to live. So this is loose talk, but it is important for me to tell it openly in order to avoid a mistake that very easily is caused by this kind of presentations about the ontological status of law. But
Aulis, we have another question. Someone would like to ask you about the relationship between the only right answer and Alexis' idea of, I don't know in English, pretensión de corrección. Can you ask the question, Noé Galicia García? Do you hear me?
yes,
Your question is very brief. I need your question, please. Who is Noé Galicia García? Do you see Juan Pablo, the person who is asking?
Me lo pasaron por chat, pero no la puedo ubicar.
No, we don't see him.
En todo caso, si querés vamos pasando tenemos 3 manos levantadas.
Sí, yes, continue.
Bueno, Gabriela Scataglini, ¿te activo el audio? Listo.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Aarnio, for your presentation. We are very happy to have you here in our seminar. My question is about the last sentence of your presentation. This about that the community cannot be wrong about its own shared belief. I agree. But my question would be, can the community be wrong, can be morally wrong, can be wrong about morality? And you may ask, well, it depends about what do you think as community? I mean, which would be the relevant community? Are we talking about the whole society of human beings? Are we talking about a smallest community? Because you can say, okay, German community under Hitler's government was wrong about killing Jews. And we can say that. But which is the relevant community? If we are talking about the whole human society, can the whole human society be wrong about morals? If we answer yes, that would be leaving behind conventionalism, you know? And I don't agree with that, but we know there is not such a thing as a point of view from nowhere. All we have is language and we, human beings. So to summarize, do you think there is a possibility to assert that the whole human society can be wrong about anything related to morality, or there is not such a possibility? I hope I'll be clear enough.
Yes, that was, I think, extremely important and interesting question. My answer is not at that level, but all in all, it is important to make a difference between existing empirically existing society and ideal society. As in the same way as the practical discourse in, for instance, courts in Argentina, in Finland, etc. It's an empirical question how they behave. Then there is an ideal for them how they should behave. In the same way, we can make a difference between existing, empirically existing societies and communities and the ideal ones. And to me, it's impossible to think that in existing world, a certain community can be of the same opinion altogether. So it's impossible, because there's always some people who don't agree with the majority. But then the most crucial question is that if we take an ideal community or ideal society, can it be wrong? I would like to say prima facie yes. Let's take an example, Nazi Germany. There are in TV in Finland, for instance, very often such kind of films where Germans or BBC describes the total opinion of German people. But what is totality in that case? It is totality which is caused by force, the power. They should be of the same opinion. They were wrong, but they were not free being wrong. So in that case, I would like to say that if people in such a situation would have a possibility to agree or disagree with each other, there begins a discourse, maybe rational partially or not. In that discourse, one possibility is that if you discuss with your countrymen, as long as it is human measures possible, finally, at least the majority is of the different opinion than the existing community. So when I am speaking as a theorist, I am not an empirical sociologist, but some kind of philosopher who is interested in the ideal procedures which are leading to the better decisions than before. But if we think the empirical societies all over the world now, I am very worried because it seems to show that in many societies the great majority follows wrong examples, and in that sense, I think that my task, if I if I had some power to change something, is to change the society or community toward the ideal one in order to start rational discussion. But after this obscure answer, I believe that still there is your question. It is an eternal question, but from theoretical point of view, extremely important and interesting question.
Renato Ravivaldi.
Good morning to all. Good morning, Professor Aarnio. It's a pleasure to see you again after many years that you have visited Argentina. Thank you for your interesting paper. We would like to publish here in Argentina if you allow. My question is the following. You have been working many years ago with Professor Pesenik and with Professor Alexi in the field of the legal reasoning, as you have mentioned today. A couple of years ago, Professor Alexi wrote an article that has been published in our review here, whose title is Human Rights Without Metaphysics? And the answer is no, according to Alexi. My question is if in the paper that you hold today, you see some relationships with Alexi's point of view. Thank you.
It was a clear question and I try to answer clearly. The longer we have cooperated with Alexi, also in Pechenik's time, the more Alexi's thoughts became close to natural law. So that was a surprising development, and therefore I think that the article what you mentioned has this kind of title. And I have not read that paper, but if you send me the bibliographical data, I would be very pleased in order to read it and check where are the differences now. But there are very, very thin differences. Yes, we both have gone all the time on the same line, and I guess that later on Alexis' answer would be based on a developed version of discursive rationality. But there is still, I guess, what he writes in that paper, that there still is something which is metaphysical, and it is a note of wonder because he is a German philosopher, and Germany is quite well known, full of metaphysical theories, but I don't see very big differences either, and with this reservation that I have not read that paper. But if we take out that paper, so I think that we are of the same opinion. Pechenik was, or I would like to say, what was the division of labor, so to speak, with us three. Alexi was the developer of rational discourse. Pechenik was extremely interested where the rational discourse should stop. It means coherency. And my task was to say something about Wittgenstein at law, and what does it mean? Later Wittgenstein's language games and so on, how they are combined to legal theory. That is, roughly speaking, the division of labor. And but then there were, of course, some general questions which we agreed so much that we could publish a common article or 3 parts of it. But please send me the bibliographical data, so I would be very, very pleased. On the other hand, you all will receive a final version of this presentation. Maybe you have one, but I shame it because it's full of mistakes, printing mistakes and so on. But the final version is also a bit longer, and I have to clarify certain parts of it. So you will receive it in a week or so.
Thank you, Agustín Bazán.
Well, good afternoon to everyone. First of all, I would like to thank you, Dr. Aarnio. Sorry if I don't speak very well English, because it's a long time ago without speaking English. In fact, yesterday night, I realized about your conference today, and I wrote some keywords. I am thinking about maybe if the most important pandemic is the values pandemic. I mean, if we think about the top, for example, the top of the mountain, we have the pandemic values, and then the path is the social, the ethic, the law, the health pandemic. On the other hand, if along the history wall, we didn't develop enough the capacity of empathy and the capacity of love. I mean, I agree with Horacio when he talked about finding common points. Even though we are different, we have different cultures or different religions. I think that maybe the point could be the same spiritual origin, or maybe the same spiritual values, if we talk about dignity of the people. And to finish, at the point of the education and the interdisciplinary, when we talk about give better solutions to our societies, to our countries, and I think if we have learned to hate to each other during the history war, we also can learn to love and give better solutions to the law, any kind of area of the human being. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now it was, I could hear clearly the last sentences, but there was an echo in the voice of your computer, because it was, I couldn't identify, but the last sentence was clear. But could you repeat the question? So these machines are horrible, because in my old ears the echo is the worst thing.
Escuchamos todos muy mal. Yo le rogaría que la última pregunta la haga más cerca del micrófono, porque se escuchó muy mal todo.
Can you hear me? No? No?
Yes, yes, I hear now. Here
Okay.
are now.
Go ahead, go ahead. Unmute, please.
Bueno, continuamos entonces, si te parece, con Enrique Zuleta Puceiro. Vos levantaste la mano, Enrique.
Sí. Well, I would like to tell you that perhaps before going back to natural law, perhaps we can make the effort of a better sociology, because most of the theory, the standard theory of argumentation, is based in a sociological assumption that is a liberal society, that people have a political culture or an ethical culture, and they share values, and these values are more or less coordinated by beliefs. And that is a very optimistic idea of legal culture. It was quite clear at the 60s and at the 70s. Because I think that democracy is something very different today. It was more similar than what democracy was before Weimar. We have a society based on a struggle of beliefs, a very strong struggles. We cannot expect in the future agreements, rational dialogue, common effort to improve our beliefs. Societies perhaps need a sociology less functionalistic and more conflictivistic. And legal theory is prepared to have that kind of effort, because legal theory have the instruments. Perhaps the instruments are not the same we use in the 60s and the 70s and even in the 80s. We are living in different societies, highly divided, where perhaps in the medium and long term, we had no possibility to expect some kind of agreement on values. I share the preoccupations of Horacio Spector and Maria Gabriela Scataglini. Perhaps we can make the effort before going to natural law with the instruments of social sciences today. Even the idea of rationality has been strongly modified by the new science of mind and the fantastic effort of empirical study of arguments. Perhaps we have to take care of these risks through a very different assumption in the empirical side. There is a lot of new things in social sciences and psychology, and perhaps many questions about what we mean by belief and totality are different answers. I don't know if Antonio Martino is here. Antonio is here, is not here, I suppose. He was. Antonio made a statement in the last session of the Academy of Law. He explained when Bulygin, Alchourrón, and all the analytical school were discussing on deontologic logic, for example. They were thinking on some aspect of the logical argument. But after the intelligence revolution, the data transformed the possibility of that logic, because the data is a disruptive phenomenon, even in ethics. The data is a fantastic new reality in the argument. And it is very important in the theory of interpretation. Most of the constitutional theory on constitutional interpretation today are a highly institutional approach, and is looking for new ways of legitimacy of judicial decisions far beyond from our 70s, 80s, and 60s theories. I think we are living a new cycle, and before going back to the natural law, we have to make some efforts with empirical science today, because it's a new instrument.
Yes, I very much agree with you, because it would be easy first to find out some connections between legal theory, or for instance, rational theory of legal reasoning, and theoretical sociology, like Weber, for instance. Why I have never seen a good investigation about the relation between this kind of theories, because Weber's analysis about society is very, very interesting and opens different kinds of points of comparison with legal theory. I had a student, she is now a member of the Supreme Court, but she made a empirical comparison between the styles of judging in the European Court of Justice. How differs, for instance, the British, German, Finnish styles to judge the same case. And that was the first in Scandinavia where this kind of empirical, half empirical, half theoretical investigation was done. And therefore, I see great possibilities to, for instance, to compare in different communities how the Alexian rules and principles of rational discourse, how they function in practice. What is the sociological role of them? What is the sociological weakness of them? So there are tens and tens such topics which would have been the target of the modern sociology and modern legal theory. It is, I think, illuminating that Georg Henrik von Wright was one, I think, the best one of living philosophers in deontic logic. Now, nobody writes theses or articles on deontic logic. Deontic logic disappeared with him. And so he and his theory had a very, very important role in his time. But we are now living another time, and other topics are coming. And his greatness was in that he moved also with the time from deontic logic to other philosophical issues. So that is my answer, that I have a very optimistic view as far as this kind of comparison is concerned.
Thank you, Professor Aarnio. Noé Galicia García, tenés la palabra.
Hello, Professor Aulis Aarnio. Your opinion on the only correct answer and Alexi claim to correctness, the relationship that may exist. Thank you.
Please, could you repeat only the rest of the last part of the question so that I can answer to you?
Your opinion on the only correct answer and Alexis' claim to correctness, the relationship that might exist.
Yes, yes, of course there is a relationship, but I think that there still is certain differences, and My interest actually has been in later times in that one right answer, and not so much in Alexian theory. But I recommend, if you like to know more in English language, my book Essays on the Doctrinal Study of Law. It was published by Springer 2000, I think 15 or so. There is at least partial answer to that question. I recommend. I am not a representative of libraries, but I recommend the book.
Bueno, thank you, Profesor Aarnio. No quedando más preguntas, le doy la palabra a Enrique. ¿Querés hablar, Horacio, o estás aplaudiendo? Ah, muchas gracias. Entonces, le doy la palabra a Enrique Zuleta Puceiro para que diga las palabras de cierre.
Gracias nuevamente a todos los que han venido hoy. No puedo mencionarlos porque son muchos y muy importantes, y me temo con olvidarme, además no veo bien todos los cuadros, pero aquí está gente que ha trabajado hace muchísimos años en relación con el pensamiento jurídico de Aarnio y el pensamiento jurídico analítico, y hay destacadísimos representantes de todas las escuelas, trialistas, naturalistas, hermenéuticos. Esto muestra un poco la importancia de este tipo de pensadores, que han sido pensadores de congruencia, que han sido capaces de buscar convergencias más allá de los límites a veces un poco demasiado forzados entre las escuelas. Aulis inauguró una forma de pensar allá en los 60, 70, junto con una gran cantidad de filósofos y juristas, los dos grupos. Me parece que ese ejemplo sigue siendo válido para el futuro de nuestra disciplina, así que agradecerles a todos la presencia. Welcome, Aulis again. We are very proud to be here with you, and we expect to hear you many times. We are expecting the end of the pandemic, because we need you here in Buenos Aires, not only to honor you, but also to continue with these very interesting discussions. Are the essential discussions, have been always the essential discussions, and will be always the essential discussions. Thank you very much, and I would like to say that Hugo Zuleta is there. I don't know, but he has been making the extraordinary effort of the chair, Alchourrón Bulygin. Martin Farrell is not here. He's the director of the department. Today is his birthday, I suppose. And but I represent them, saying thank you very much, and thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you. For my part, great many thanks. It was an excellent possibility for me, and unfortunately, this kind of mechanical tools made a problem for me in hearing everything. I beg your pardon for that. But I only hope all of you the best in the future, success for the books and articles you are writing and investigations. Argentina has been all the time very, very important country for me, because it has been and it is the leading country in Latin America in legal philosophy. So they were great events that I had a privilege to visit here. So I and my wife, we remember Argentina is one of the most fantastic countries, and in a deep, deep culture. Thank you very much.
Hugo, no sé si querés decir unas palabras de cierre. A ver si podemos. Dale.
Bueno, Thank you very much, Professor Aarnio. It's an honor to have you here. Muchas gracias a todos por haber participado. Y bueno, nos veremos el próximo martes, creo.
Correcto. Que va a hablar el profesor Martín Farrell y ya va a ser la última jornada del año del seminario Alchourrón Bulygin. Bueno,
sí, fíjense, presten atención que no, nos veníamos reuniendo cada 2 semanas, pero tengan en cuenta que esta vez va a pasar solo una semana. Es decir, el martes que viene nos volvemos a reunir para hacer la sesión de cierre con el profesor Martín Farrell.
Bueno, entonces es todo. Los saludo a todos.
Bye bye.
Bye, Aulis.
Bye bye. And many greetings to Carmen.